Hi, everybody. Keegan Kuhn is the award-winning co-director of the highly acclaimed documentary films CultureShift, The Sustainability Secret, executive produced for Netflix by Leonardo DiCaprio, and What the Health, executive produced by Joaquin Phoenix. Kuhn is the owner and operator of First Spark Media, a digital film production company tailored to creating films for social justice. His skills as a director, producer, cinematographer, editor, animator, and composer have been utilized in film subjects as diverse as modern Alaskan homesteading, gender inequality, animal rescues, Buddhism, endurance sports, and environmental destruction. He is motivated by a deep desire to shed light on untold stories of the most downtrodden in our society and to raise awareness through greater visibility of social justice issues. He's the owner of the camera accessory company First Spark Gear and creator of the educational music project X True Nature X. He lives with his partner Shawnee in Sedona, Arizona. Welcome, Keegan.
Thanks so much.
All right, so this series is titled Media for Change, and I want to start off by asking you about your journey to becoming a filmmaker and the impact that you are able to add to this movement through your filmmaking.
Yeah, so I started as a musician. Like my background, I was highly influenced by a political hardcore punk band called Earth Crisis, and they talked about veganism, and that was my introduction to veganism. And so as an activist, I was always looking for like what's the most effective tool, and I've tried everything from public speaking to protest, leafleting, other types of activism, and I came down to like, well, I love music. Music influenced me, so I should go into that. And so I did this project called True Nature for about a decade. But I struggled with feeling like I was only reaching so many people. And after years of doing that, I thought, well, what's the other thing that's had a huge influence on me? And that was documentary films. And so I started teaching myself everything I could about filmmaking. I had grown up making skate videos, and so I had a little bit of experience with cameras. And I just took it upon myself, though, to learn it as a craft. And so I started shooting short videos for nonprofit organizations that I believed in, that I thought were doing good work. And that very quickly became shooting feature documentaries. And so in the course of about 2 years, I went, or actually really a year, I went from shooting short videos to feature-length documentaries.
That's incredible. So it seems like there's a huge future for Rowdy coming to us. So can you tell us a little bit about like the numbers of people that you've been able to reach through the documentaries versus if you were to just be out there giving presentations yourself?
Yeah, it is phenomenal, the reach that films have, because they can, they're entertainment first and foremost. People want to be entertained. And so it's like blending this education and entertainment together. As a musician, we played between 20 to 400 people a night, which is great, but that's only so many people. Where the films, I mean, Cowspiracy, when it came out, we released it on our website, cowspiracy.com, and we had 40,000 people watch it in the first day, and for 40,000 people download it. So how many other people watched it is the big question. When the films ended up on Netflix, Netflix has a subscription of hundreds of millions of people. And so the ability for literally 150 million people to see the film was immediate. And so we don't have exact numbers on that, but we know for sure that it's in the tens of millions of people have seen Cowspiracy or What the Health. And so the reach is just phenomenal. And that's the reason why I stuck with filmmaking, is because I feel like it is such an effective tool for bringing about cultural change.
Yeah, that impact is, I mean, the ability to reach that many people is a dream, I think, for a lot of us on this call who care about the issues related to eating animals and factory farming. So I believe that when you first met Kip, you completed Cowspiracy in 10 months, which just seems like a very short amount of time for a documentary that had 40,000 downloads in a single day. So can you tell us a little bit about like what the process is of directing a documentary and getting it to the point where it can be downloaded and viewed?
Yes. So yeah, we did Cowspiracy in 10 months. From the time Kip and I first met to completion was 10 months. And how I shoot documentaries is I write them out as if they're scripted films. And so a lot of times people will have like an idea, like, hey, I want to get this message out, or I have this idea that I want to talk about. But I think that while that's lots of people make films that way, it is very time consuming because you don't have your whole story there. And it's really hard to budget because you don't know how many interviews you need, where's the film going to go? And then editing is just a nightmare because you're dealing with so much media, not knowing where your story is. So we wrote out Cowspiracy, and I write out all my films. This is where it goes, and this person's going to say this thing, and it's going to have this arc, so that it's all on paper. And then you can go out and shoot, and you know exactly who you need. And we know we need a doctor to say this line to talk about this data and this research. And so even before the writing stage, obviously it and kind of goes along with it is learning as much as you can about the subject so that you have all the data to back up so that you're as well informed as possible. Once you start shooting, obviously there's going to be even more information that's going to be brought up. You're going to learn more, and so there's going to add more fuel to the fire that you're building. Then there's the whole editing process, which is the hardest part in my mind, because you're just locking yourself in a room and figuring out how to put together 100 hours down into 90 minutes. And then as things have changed so radically with film distribution, people can release their own films now without needing to have a major studio or major distributor to get behind their film. They can put their film up on Vimeo on demand or on YouTube or on iTunes or Google Play or all these different places if they want to generate funds, but they can also just put it out for free. And that doesn't exist. Just a number of years ago, we weren't able to distribute films in the same sort of way. And so I think we're at this incredibly pivotal time of creating content and getting information out to people.
Yeah, and I've been really stunned by how you've been able to put together these really quality documentaries with, I think, a history of a very low budget, which as a nonprofit, we certainly relate to. And it's interesting that you're talking about going into some of these interviews and just knowing that this is the line you want somebody to say, because in They're Trying to Kill Us, that was more interviews than I'd ever seen in any of your documentaries before. You and I have talked about how you did over 100 interviews. And for those of you who have not yet seen They're Trying to Kill Us, it is a fantastic documentary. I just saw it over the weekend at the Tribeca Film Fest. It explores the insidious relationship between structural racism and chronic disease. And I know that creation of that film took a lot longer than Cowspiracy. I'm wondering if you can speak to that and why the name changed from Hungry for Justice to They're Trying to Kill Us.
Yeah. That film took so much longer because the scope of it. So, Cowspiracy has about 45, 50 interviews in it. Yeah, They're Trying to Kill Us. We had 100. We interviewed well over 100 people for the film. The scope of the film is so much broader reaching because while the heart of the film is following my co-director, John, on this journey investigating why is it that Americans of color suffer from disproportionately higher rates than European Americans, it is this massive look at, institutionalized racism, government collusion with industry, factory farming, and environmental racism. I mean, it is just this massive scope that all comes back to the same source. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason why it took so long was I have a really bad habit of starting other projects while working on a project. So I started working on a film I did called Running for Good before we finished What the Health. I started working on They're Trying to Kill Us before I finished Running for Good. I started working on another film called The End of Medicine before we finished They're Trying to Kill Us. So I constantly juggled multiple projects, and so it slowed things down. And then there's just a lot of life has happened in between too. So it was, a lot has happened in the 4 years that it took to make that film. I think in taking away all the other distractions, we probably could have done the film in about 2 years. But again, it's trying to do too much with too little time.
Yeah, I know that you have a tendency to push yourself really hard. I know that after Running for Good, which for those of you who have not seen it, he goes to the Sahara Desert and Fiona Oakes is running like essentially multiple days of marathons, and Keegan, you're out there, you're running as well. And then you got a respiratory infection. So it's definitely been a lot. You've really pushed yourself. I want to go back a little bit more now to what They're Trying to Kill Us, because one thing that I've noticed in your films is it's not just an interview, right? That you do really try and make sure that there is a storyline, and you're incorporating graphics that I think are really interesting. And I mentioned earlier before everyone joined us that we used one of the clips where Kip was taking a shower and then there was like all the gallons of water that were being used. What is the process of deciding which graphics to use and how do you create those?
Yeah. I think the big thing is making things accessible and tangible. If you can say it takes, whatever, 2,500 gallons of water to produce a quarter pound burger, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. Like, what's 2,500 gallons of water? And so you can show them a tangible comparison, then it becomes real. And so while making these films, it's always that we're always looking for the thing that we think is really important, that works as a great soundbite that people can then take with them. And yeah, you do an animation, you do a comparison, you do an analogy, and that lands with people in a stronger way than versus just hitting them with facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the images are things that we all do remember. And also the cinematography of They're Trying to Kill Us really stuck with me as well, because you went to the Navajo Nation. And I know you live in Sedona, which is very close to that. And I used to be a third grade teacher out there. And then you went, and then you went to Ferguson, you went to the North Carolina hog factory farm. So it seemed like you really traveled all over the place for this film to really expose all this environmental racism, all this social injustice all around the country. And there were many times where I was like, how is all of this in one film? For this film, did you do that same process like with Cowspiracy, where it really was like this, these are the exact interviews that I want to have, and these are all the areas of the country that I want to make sure we visit?
Yeah. Yeah. So John and I, my co-director for the film, we wrote out the whole film. And, you know, obviously there was new things that came along, and there's, you know, big reveals that happen legitimately in the film that happened to us legitimately, where you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this was connected to this. And so, you know, someone who's being interviewed, you go to interview them to talk about a specific thing, and they start talking about something that you had no idea about. And so that's the exciting part, but that's also where things can get out of control really quickly. You start going down all these side paths. And so what I try and do with all these films is that you have a really strong through line, and but from that through line, you know you're going to take these side tracks and you're going to come back into that main line for the whole film. And so this film, you know, They're Trying to Kill Us does that a lot, where it's like you're on a path and you take an audience down a side path real quick to get them to get the information to then bring it back to the main story. And that's too, it's just like a storytelling technique, just how to keep an audience engaged, because if you just keep hitting them with the same thing over and over and over, they're like, okay, I need a break. And especially as attention spans get shorter and shorter, we need to be able to get people to change subjects while still staying in the same field.
Yeah, it was phenomenal because we were learning about, you know, the police killings and in Ferguson, and then again we're on the Dene Nation is actually the preferred term, where you're learning about the lasting effects of colonization. And then we hear a hog farmer talk about how he used to grow tobacco to kill people. And now he's growing these pigs, which also essentially kills people. And so the connections that are being made are really profound. And I think that the viewer really understands that all of these oppressions are interrelated. Were you already aware of all these oppressions prior to making the film? Or, you know, when that farmer said what he said, were you just like, oh my gosh, it's even clearer now?
Yeah. You know, to an extent, I was aware of the subjects, and that's why, you know, I wanted to work on the film. But, you know, for my co-director John, who's African American, yeah, he was much more aware. And I think, like, as a white American, I can only be so aware of what Americans of color actually go through. And so this was a huge learning experience for me. And I think it worked really well to have, you know, Black American and white American making this film together, because we were both coming from different backgrounds, trying to reach different audiences in the same film. And I think it's going to be really impactful for that reason, that it was across different cultures, and the crew that worked on this film too was from all different backgrounds. And so that, I think that also helped as well.
In one of the crowdfunding campaigns, I think you mentioned that this was one of the most controversial films that you had ever produced. Can you explain why?
Yeah, well, I mean, the movie's called They're Trying to Kill Us. And so it's definitely controversial. But it's, you know, talking about racism in America is a super controversial, it's like a taboo. No one's supposed to talk about it, at least in white society. And so to do that, and sadly there has been a pushback from, you know, single issue focused vegans who are like, no, you know, you should only talk about non-human animals, and not seeing the interconnectedness and the intersections of oppression. um, there was folks who didn't like the fact that, you know, there was a white co-director on the film, that, you know, I had no business being part of it, and that's understandable and appreciated. There were a lot of things too that we were going, were going deeper than Cowspiracy and What the Health had gone, and we were digging harder and exposing things, the real ugly truth of the interconnectedness of this. And so, yeah, it comes with a lot of controversy, and I think for the few folks who have seen it through Tribeca, it doesn't hold back.
It does not. It's a very deep film. It was not hastily done. Um, I've heard people ask you why you are vegan, and you always say that you're an ethical vegan, that you grew up in a household where you were told not to hurt anybody. And that meant like your siblings, of course, but that also connected to animals. And I've been thinking about this a lot after watching They're Trying to Kill Us, because there are so many ways in which I think like hurting a body can be very obvious, right? Like killing an animal, of course, or like punching your brother. But in They're Trying to Kill Us, it seems less obvious the ways in which we are harming other beings. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to that, because I don't think that it's something that is as clear. What you're describing as a child, right? Like that just made so much sense. Of course, like if you hurt an animal, it runs away, or your brother or sister. But with this, there are so many ways in which it seems clear that we are hurting other beings. Um, it's just not as clear.
Yeah, for me, I'm an ethical vegan. Like that's why I became vegan, was I just thought it's not okay what we're doing to non-human animals. And then all the other things came along with the environment, health, and social justice. But I'm not like an animal person. I'm not like, I don't want a bunch of animals around me. While I've worked in sanctuaries and I've worked around animals, I wouldn't consider myself like an animal lover. For me, it's about justice. It's just unjust what we do to other beings. And so that's part of the do no harm ethic in my mind, is about justice. And if you wouldn't want this being done to you, you shouldn't do it to anyone else. Um, and so the injustice, and that's really the focus of They're Trying to Kill Us, is exposing the injustice that exists in the current system. And so that's part of, yeah, to me, the don't hurt anybody. Um, the film really looks into, though, the fact that our purchasing power and who we decide to support politically, and the companies that we decide to support, and the culture that we decide to support, how that influences and impacts others. And so that's about, just digging deeper, and yeah, it's one step removed where you go, oh, but by buying this, whether it's, animal product or not, is influencing this company to continue to do bad things. And so it's about personal responsibility. And again, just going back to justice, like what is just and what isn't.
Do you do you know when you started to really make some of these connections? Has it been as you've developed in your film career? I mean, the environmental connection, I think, has gained a lot of traction. I think many people, many of the audiences I speak to, including in environmental nonprofits, more of them are starting to make these connections. But what's brought up and They're Trying to Kill Us is not as evident, or it's not as talked about, I think, in mainstream media. How do you think this is going to add to the conversation? Do you think that it will become mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, so my introduction, my mom was an activist, and human activist and animal activist. She mostly focused on women's rights and reproductive rights. And so I was raised to raise hell and to be a punk, and so that was the culture I grew up with. I mean, my mom was suspended from high school for writing a paper called "How the West Was Stolen versus How the West Was Won," about Indigenous Americans losing their land to European Americans. So it's like that's who raised me, and so the injustice was part of my consciousness. And then I came from the punk and hardcore scene, which oftentimes has politically charged lyrics about these same sort of subjects. So my awareness was there. When it comes to, will this become mainstream? I think it is. I think we look at the uprisings of last summer of people saying enough is enough. And it wasn't just, African Americans who were saying that. It was everybody saying this has to stop. And so I think that it has the potential, but this is also, They're Trying to Kill Us is, again, controversial. It hits a lot of boxes and affects a lot of people's wallets. And so the only way that's going to change is if people are willing to talk about it and people are willing to spread it. And so, right now we're in the process of getting distribution for the film to get it as widely available as possible so that it becomes part of the consciousness. Because yeah, when Cowspiracy came out, lots of people knew about the negative impacts of animal agriculture, but people weren't talking about it in the same sort of way. And that film got to play a role in helping push the conversation so that people can't say they're environmentalists while eating meat. They go, oh, well, they have to come up with some other rationale or excuse or logic to justify why they're eating meat while they say they care about the animals. And so the same sort of film about social justice is like, social justice goes beyond just police killing unarmed Black people. Like this is a much bigger subject.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that those of us on the call can do to help support the film and make sure it's seen by the most people? I already said that I want to show the trailer as much as I can.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We don't have much to announce just yet. When the film comes out, promoting it and sharing it and getting people, talking about it and tweeting about it and just using any social media possible to spread the information would be incredibly helpful. But until we have widescreen distribution, we're just sitting tight.
Understood. All right. So we were speaking about justice earlier, and I know a lot of the folks on this call tonight, and they care a lot about justice and have devoted much of their waking life to fighting injustice. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for them, whether they are aspiring filmmakers or looking to raise awareness in other ways.
I think, for me as an activist, I've tried lots of different types of activism, and I've been better at some things than I've been at others. Well, if I used to do a lot of protests, and I'm not a good protester because I'm too angry and I lose it. And so I decided, like, all right, protesting isn't my strength. And I think to be an activist and long term is to follow your passion. And so, and whatever your skill set is. And so it's like, I'm fortunate enough to have this skill set as a filmmaker that I've created, but I have the skill set, so I'm going to utilize that for it. And it's something that nurtures me and feeds me creatively, and so I can stick with it. Versus, a lot of times people feel like, oh, I have to do only this type of activism works. And it's like, if you're really comfortable and like public presentations, doing and being involved in something like FFAC is incredible, because you're utilizing your skill set that not a lot of people have. Not a lot of people feel super comfortable getting up and talking in front of a group, especially about, what can be a contentious issue like our use and abuse of non-human animals. So I really just encourage everybody to follow their passion, and whatever that is. And maybe your passion doesn't seem like it aligns. You're like, well, I want to be an accountant, or I am an accountant. Well, you still utilize your skills to help an organization that furthers that message. And so it's just, again, I think it's just about aligning what you're already passionate about with this greater cause of pushing forward a more just world.